Welcome to this video, guys. So in this video we're gonna build an application called Money Manager. Okay, so we'll use JavaScript and Tailwind CSS to build this application. So what this application does is that it says enter the amount that you want to manage. Now if you enter anything else other than number and press enter, then it actually gives you an error message and it says please enter a valid amount. Okay, now if you enter the real amount, so let's enter 10,000, and if you press enter, now a section kind of pops out and it says how would you like to divide the money. So there are 4 inputs here, one for necessities, one for accessories, one for emergency, and one for savings. And we actually have to enter in terms of percentage. But if I click this evaluate my money button here without adding anything here, then what will happen is that an error will pop out and it will say value for the input field is not given. Please provide the value for all inputs. So let's provide that. Let's add 50, 50, 50, and 50 here. Evaluate. Again, it gives me another message saying the total percentage is exceeding 100. Please make sure that it does not exceed 100. So let's do that. For necessities, let's add 40. For accessories, let's add 30. For emergency, let's add 10. And for savings, let's just add 20. Now they're actually, if I add this, then actually it will give you a sum of 100. So let's evaluate that. This will load for 1 second, and there you go, we actually have our result. So it says here's how you should manage your money. So for necessities, I got $4,000. For accessories, I gotta spend $3,000. For emergency, I gotta spend $1,000, and for savings I got $2,000. Okay, so that's how this application works, and if you reset this button, everything will go back to normal. So let's build this application. Okay, so for the UI, we are going to use a CSS framework called Tailwind CSS. Okay, now Tailwind CSS is a low-level framework, and one good thing about Tailwind CSS is that it does not create custom components. Like in Bootstrap, if you add a class like button primary, then you will get an already designed button, right? However, this is not the case in Tailwind. Okay, you have to create a class for all the small details, and that actually makes it really flexible. You can read the documentation here and the CSS properties of different classes. For example, if you go to the font size here, and if you add text XS class to an element, then its font size is set to 0.5 rem. Similarly, for text SM, the font size will be 0.75 rem. Okay, for 2XL, font size is 1.5 rem. And you can also go here to text color, and for adding text color, you can add text hyphen and then the color name hyphen the intensity. Okay, so 100 being the lightest and 900 being the darkest. And rest of the classes I'll actually explain it along the way. Now this is not a Tailwind tutorial, so I won't be explaining all the things. I'll only explain the class that I'll be using. Now for the code editor, I'll be using Atom, but feel free to use your favorite editor. So if you want to use Atom, and if you haven't installed it, then you can download it here and install it. So let's create a folder here, okay, and call it Money Manager. Now let's go to Atom. Now this is what you'll see first if you're using Atom for the first time. So if you want to open our folder, let's open our folder that we just created. Let's go to File and Open Folder and select the folder that we created. So it's in my PC, desktop, Money Manager. Okay. Now I need 2 files here. So right click, new file, and then create index.html file here. Second file that I need is app.js. Okay, now we won't need a CSS file because most of the styling will do it from Tailwind CSS. Now I do have an extension called Emmet install, and it basically has shortcuts that will help me write HTML code faster. Okay, now with Emmet, just hit the exclamation and hit tab and the HTML boilerplate will be created. Okay, that's a shortcut. So here we have our doc type HTML that tells us the browser, the HTML version we're using, the head tag. These meta tags, you don't have to worry about much. This line actually is for character encoding, and it is capable of encoding all the characters in the web. This tag here sets the viewport, which is the visible area of your screen, and depending on the device, whether it's phone or PC or tablet, the website will adjust itself. Okay, now this is a document mode meta tag that allows web authors to actually choose what version of Internet Explorer the page should be rendered. So, but you don't have to worry about this. Okay, I would like to change the title here to Money Manager. So let's open our HTML file and see. Okay, so title here is changed to Money Manager, so this is working. Now in order to use Tailwind CSS in our project, let's go to get started here, and there are a lot of ways to install it, but we're going to use a CDN. So go at the bottom and copy this link tag. Okay, now go to your HTML page here and just above the title paste that link, and now you can actually use Tailwind CSS in your project. So let's try it out. Let's create a p tag. Now with the help of Emmet, I can actually do p and tab, and the p tag will actually be created. Okay, so let's type hello world here, and let's create a class, and let's add our Tailwind CSS class here called text-red-500. Okay, so what it does is it changes the text color to red. So let's check that out. Refresh it, and you can see that the text color is now red. Okay, so the Tailwind CSS class is actually working. So let's remove that. So first what I'm going to do is change the background color. Okay, it's kind of white right now, but I want it slightly gray, so let's do that. And since you're changing the entire background, we can add our class in our body tag. So let's create a class here, class, and to add a background we have to write bg for background, hyphen, we have to set its color, that is gray, and hyphen, and the intensity I want it 100. Okay, so let's refresh it and see. Now I don't know if you guys noticed it, but the background actually changed to a slightly gray color. Okay, so let's create our UI. So the first thing I want to do is create a header section. Okay, and so let's create a header tag here. Now this is just a container, and for its class I want a blue background, so bg blue 500, and I also want a border. So if you just write border, then it kind of creates a small border around it. Now inside the header tag I want an h1 tag to write our app name. Okay, so let's do that. Let's create h1, and inside it let's write Money Manager. Okay, so let's check that now. Refresh it, and as you can see we have our blue background. Okay, we also have a border right here. I don't know if you guys can notice it, but we do have a small border, and we also have the text. Okay, so let me just show you the border. Okay, as you can see here, there's a thin border around this blue background. Okay, now let's style our text. Now I want this app name to be a little bit bigger, so let's add some classes here. Now in order to change the font size, we actually have a class of text hyphen, and then you can actually specify the size. Like we have SM, we have LG, and we have MD, but I actually want the font size to be really big, so what I'm going to do is write 4XL. Okay, now if I refresh it, as you can see the app name became much bigger. Now if you're not understanding this, then let's go to the documentation here, go to font size, and actually I use this class 4XL. Okay, and it actually gave me a font size of 2.25 rem. That's why the text became bigger. Now I also want our app name to be a little bit bolder, so just write font hyphen semi-bold. You can also write bold instead of semi-bold, but let's just write semi-bold right now. And I don't think I have to explain this much, because just by looking at the class name you can directly tell what it will do. So let's refresh this, and actually my font became a little bit bolder. Okay, I also want to change the text color, so let's write text hyphen white. No need to specify the intensity in this case, and I want a little bit of padding as well. So in order to add padding, you can actually do px for left and right, okay, py for top and bottom, but I actually want padding on all the four sides, so I'll just write p hyphen, and for the value I'll write 4. Okay, it's kind of similar to Bootstrap. I also want to center the text. Okay, so let's add text hyphen center, and this will center the text. Okay, so let's go here and refresh. Okay, so the text is white, it also has some padding, and it's centered. Okay, now I do want a small border here just to make it look good. If you want a border on the specific side, then you can actually do like this. Okay, so border hyphen, and then add b for bottom, and then specify the border width. Okay, 4 means 4 pixels, so we'll have a border bottom of 4 pixels. I also want to make the border a bit darker, so to set the border color, write border hyphen, specify the color name, that is blue, and then the intensity, I think 600 would do it. Okay, open that and refresh it. Okay, so now the border bottom is a little bit darker. Okay, so the header section is now done. Now what I want to do is create an input field here to enter our amount, so let's create that. Okay, so input section. Now whatever content that I will be creating, except for header, I actually want them to be inside a container. Okay, I actually want the container to have a certain width from here to here, and this container should be on the center. Okay, if you've used Bootstrap, you might be familiar with this class. Okay, so let's create a div with a class container. Now this actually creates a container div, and it will have a specific width. Okay, now whatever we are going to create will actually be inside this container. Okay, and let me just change this to container because it's going to contain everything. Now let's create that input section comment here. Okay, so let's create a div first, and inside this div I want an input field, and I also want a label for that input. Okay, so let's do that first. Let's create a label tag. Okay, so for I will write later. First let's add our text here, which is enter the amount that you want to manage. So let's create our input field. So input type text is okay. Let's just save it and see. Refresh that. So now we have our label text, and we also have our input field. If you didn't notice, the input field is just right next to the label. Okay, one thing is that the input section does not have much distance from the header section, so what I'm going to do is add a little bit of margin. I want to add this margin to this entire input section. Actually add a class here. Now adding a margin is similar to adding a padding. I just want a margin at the top, so let's just add mt for margin top hyphen, and for the value I want 10. Okay, now let's just save it and refresh here. Now it creates the margin top of 10. Okay, now it's time to style label, but first let me add something inside the for here. Let's just add enter underscore money, and since I wrote enter money inside the for attribute, I can create an ID on the input field and set its value to enter money. Okay, so now the label and the input is kind of connected. Now for the class, I actually want the size of the text to be 2XL. Let's also add a class on the input section. So let's add class. Now I want a small shadow over the input field, so let's do that. If I refresh it here, as you can see, my text became a little bit big, and this input section also has a small shadow. Okay, so what this shadow class does is actually creates a drop shadow. Now HTML by default gives some styling to the input field, right? So to remove all the default styling, you can actually add a class called appearance-none. It removes all the default styling. And I also want a border. Okay, so and for the border color, I want gray and 500 for intensity. I also want a border radius, so in order to add a radius, just add a class called rounded, and this creates rounded corners. I want a padding of 5 on left and right, and padding of 2 from top and bottom. So let's see, let's check that out. Let's refresh it. Okay, so now the input field is much bigger, and it also has a border and a border radius as well. Now I want the input, what I want is the input field to come down as well as take it to the center. Okay, in order to take the input field and the label to the center, in CSS you had margin auto, right? And it's actually the same in Tailwind CSS, and all you have to do is add MX auto and this will center the element. But right now this won't work. This is because label and input both are inline elements. Okay, and if you know basic CSS, margin and padding does not work on inline elements. So right now what we're doing is we are actually trying to add a margin on this inline element, which will not work, and that's why these elements are not shifting towards the center. So in order to solve this problem, in order to bring these elements to the center, what we can do is convert this inline element into block elements. Okay, so to convert this inline element into block element, all you have to do is add a class called block, and this inline element will now become a block element. Okay, and now the margin and padding will work here. So let's add block, margin auto. Let's also do here block and also margin auto. Let's see, refresh it, and it's not centered. Okay, so let me just check that out. Let's go to our code here. Oh, you know what, I just wrote margin auto. It should be MX auto. I'm really sorry. It should be MX auto. Let's see. Okay, so only input was centered. Let's see. Oh, again, this label is set to block. When this label is set to block element, it actually covers the entire line. Okay, the entire line, entire row. So even if you do MX auto, it goes nowhere. Okay, and instead of MX auto, what you can do is text center, add a text center, and that will bring the text to the center. Okay, now this input section is not aligning with the header section. Okay, that's because the container div that we have created is not centered. If you right click and go to inspect here, if you go to container here, can you see that blue color? That's actually our container, and by just seeing it you can tell that it's not centered. So let's center that. Okay, so let's just add MX auto and it will be centered. Alright, now they are both aligning with each other. Now let me create some space here. Let me add a margin top of 5 here. Refresh it. Alright. Now the input section is done. Now let's move on to the next section. Now if I enter an amount here and hit enter, I want a manage section to pop out here. Okay, now we'll be using JavaScript to make it pop out, but first let's create the UI for that. Okay, let's create the manage section. So first let me just comment this out, manage section. Okay, so let's create a div and let's add a class here. I want the margin top of 10 because I want some space between the input and the manage section. Let's add a p tag, and inside this let's write, how would you like to divide the money? Let's add a class here, and I want the size to be, you might be getting a hang of it, so let the size be text XL and text center to center the text, and let's also make it semi-bold. Okay, the next thing I want is the 4 input fields to enter our percentage. Okay, now for each input, that is for necessities, emergency, accessories, and savings, I actually want to create a section for each of these inputs and wrap all the 4 sections within a parent div. Okay, so let's do that. Inside this parent div, let's create a div, and now inside this div we will have our input and the label tag. Okay, so let's do that. Let's add a label tag, and for let's add necessities here. Let's also give the percentage sign, and inside this for, let's also add necessity. Okay, so let's also create an input field, and let's add an ID and set that to necessity. Okay, because we had necessity here. Let's just save it and see, and there we have our necessity. Okay, if we inspect this, this div is the parent div. Okay, inside this div we will have our 4 div, and each div will contain the label and the input. Okay, now let's copy this. So let's copy this and paste it here, here, and here, because we want the 4 divs. Okay, let's change this to accessories, this to emergency, and this right here to savings. Let's go here and say refresh it. Let's also add some classes to the input fields. So let's add class. I want a shadow around it, also set to appearance none. It's kind of similar to the input field that we had created on the input section. So border gray 500 for the border color, and I also want the border radius to be rounded. And for the padding, I want 3 on the left and right and 1 on the top and bottom. Okay, so let's copy this and paste it here, here, and here as well. Okay, let's save it and see. Okay, so the styling is created. Now if you see this, they are on top of each other. What I want is this div to be next to each other. Okay, so in order to do that, we can use a Flexbox. And if you go to the documentation here, Tailwind CSS actually has a class for Flexbox. So in order to bring this div, these four divs next to each other, go to the parent div here, okay, and add a class of flex. Okay, so that's it. That's all I have to do. I go here and refresh it. Now these four sections are kind of next to each other. Okay, now they are not on top of each other, they are next to each other. One thing I can do is add a class here called FlexGrow, and let's add it on all the four divs. And what it does is that it will utilize all the space available. Let's create a margin top here of 8. Alright. Let me just remove this padding because I don't want it to be cluttered. Okay. So, alright. Now, the only thing left in this section is a button to evaluate. Okay. So let's do that. Let's create a button. So let's create it here. And for the class, I want a blue button. So let's create the background blue, and the intensity should be 500. Now I also want a hover state on this button. So let's write hover colon. And what you want to do when you hover on this button, so I want the background to be a little bit light, so let's do BG blue 400. Okay, now when you hover on a button, the background will actually be a little bit lighter. I also want the text to be white and font to be bold. Padding on left and right I want 2, and padding on top and bottom I want 4. I also want a border bottom of 4 pixels width, and also the color of that border bottom to be blue, and 700 for the intensity. And when I hover onto that button, I want the border color to be 500. Okay, I also want a rounded corner for the button, and let's also add a margin top of 10. Since this button is an inline element, let's add block to make it a block element, and mx sorter to center it. Okay, it's actually a long list of class. And lastly, inside this, let's write evaluate my money. Okay, refresh it. There we have our button. It does not have rounded corners, so let's see what went wrong. Oh, actually spelled it wrong. Let's remove that. Okay, let's refresh it. Alright, now the button is a little bit, now the corners are a little bit rounded, and there we go. We have also created our manage section. Now let's create the final section that displays the evaluated results. So let's comment here, show results section. Let's create a div. Let's start by creating a div, add a class of empty10 because I want some distance between this section and the manage section that is right above it. Let's add a p here, and I want the text to be 2XL. Also want it to be centered, and also want it to be a little bit bolder. Inside this p tag, let's write here's how you should manage your money. Okay. Okay, now just like in the manage section where we use the Flexbox, we're also going to do the same thing here as well. So the only difference is that here we're going to show the results. Okay, so let's create a parent div, and inside this div we're going to have 4 divs to actually show the result for each category. Okay, if that's for accessories, emergency, savings, and necessities. So let's do that. Let's create a div, and I want the background of this div to be blue. For the intensity, let's go for 600. I also want a shadow, and this time I want a little bit larger, so let's add -lg. Padding on the left and right I want 6, and padding on the top and bottom I want 4. Okay, that's done. Now inside this we're going to add an h1 tag, and for the class I want the font to be bold. I want the text color to be white, and for the size I want the text to be XL. Okay, XL stands for extra large. Okay, that's it. And inside this let's just add necessities. Okay, so in this particular section we're actually gonna display our necessities. Okay, that amount of money that you should spend on necessities. So let's add a p, and this p will actually display the result. Okay, now actually we're going to use JavaScript to display our result, but since we have not written our JavaScript, let's just add a default template here. Let's just write $300, and for the class I want text to be white and font to be semi-bold, and for the size let's just add text -2 XL. Okay, let's just go here, refresh it, and see. Alright, so there you go. We have our blue section of necessities, and it's showing $300. Okay, right now it's stepping up the entire row, but we're gonna fix that later on. For now, let's just copy. Okay, I also want rounded here. Let's just go here and check that. Alright, we have our rounded corners. Okay, so let's copy this and paste it 3 times. Change this to accessories. This right here to emergency. And this here to savings. Okay, and what I want to do is change the background here of accessories to pink, change this to purple, and also change this to green. Okay, let's save it, and there you go. We have our 4 sections, and they are on top of each other. So what I want is for them to be right next to each other. Okay, so let's add a class on the parent div, and let's just add flex, and I also want a margin top of 5, and let's go here and let's write flex scroll, because I also want the flex items to actually consume the entire space. So let's go flex scroll and flex scroll here. Okay, so let's see. Let's go here, let's refresh it. Alright, there we have, right next to each other, all the 4 elements. Now, I do want a margin between them. Okay, I don't need to add margin on all the 4 divs. Okay, let's just create on the first and the third div. So let's add mx here to 5, and also mx here to 5. That will do the trick. Refresh it, and there you go, we have our margin. And the last thing that I want to have is a reset button. Okay, so let's create that. Let's do button, and for the class I want the background to be red. For the intensity, let's go 500. And when I hover onto this button, I want the background to be a little bit light red, so let's go red, and intensity, change that to 400. I also want the text to be white here, and the font of the text to be bold. For the padding on top and bottom, I'll go for 2, and for right and left padding, I'll go for 4. Let's also add a border bottom of 4 pixels width, and let's change the border color to red. For the intensity, I want it a little bit darker, so 700. And when I hover onto this border, I want the border to be light, little bit light, so border rate 500 would do it. And I also want the corners to be rounded, and empty 5 to create a little bit of space from the upper section. And again, since this is an inline element, let's turn it into block and MX auto to center it. Okay, and here let's just write reset. I know these classes are a little bit longer, but once you get used to using Tailwind CSS, you'll actually find it really simple and really easy. Okay, and it's kind of actually letting you do all these things, and it's kind of actually letting you custom create things, which is kind of really difficult and which is kind of not possible in Bootstrap. Okay, if you want to design a custom element, then you have to create an external CSS file, okay, for that. But here it's actually giving you classes in order for you to create custom designs. Okay, and that's what really good about that is what's really good about Tailwind CSS. So there you go, we have our reset button, and actually this is it, guys. We have created our basic UI, and right now this application won't work because we have not added the functionality. We have not created our JavaScript, and that is what we're going to do in the next video. And we'll add JavaScript, make it functional and make it more realistic, and complete our app. Okay, so in the next video what we're going to do is add JavaScript to it.